Things are looking up for one of East Africa's most promising economies, Somalia. The economy is rebounding from the triple shock that ravaged the country in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic, extreme flooding, and the locust infestation. Real GDP growth is projected at 2.4% in 2021. This growth momentum is expected to continue in the medium term and reach pre-COVID-19 levels of 3.2% in 2023. Now add to this, the country is setting up a national payments system as part of larger plans to develop the financial industry in one of the world's most fragile states. This comes after decades of political and economic instability. The 13 lenders in the country will now be connected to the clearing and settlement system of the central bank and be able to transact with each other. Central Bank of Somalia Governor Abdirahman Mohamed Abdullahi said the system will facilitate transactions between vendors and their customers more efficiently. The central bank has awarded the license for the system to the country's largest telecommunications provider, Hormuz Telecom, which runs the electronic voucher card. Under the system, the central bank connects lenders to a clearing and payments platform to enable them to process real-time money transfers. It also includes interoperability capabilities for debit and credit cards, mobile network operators, and automated cash machines. In the COVID era, cash is no longer king, as citizens around the world fast embrace cards, the internet, and apps for financial transactions. Norway currently ranks the world's most cashless society with only 4% of transactions currently conducted offline. Somalia's government is looking to unseat Norway and become the world's truly first fully cashless society. Join me today as we focus on Somalia sets up national payments system. I'm Tolulokwe Adeleru Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Joining me is geoeconomics and macro analyst Ali Khan Sachu. He's also the CEO of Rich Management, and he joins me from Nairobi, Kenya. Ali Khan, it's good to see you again. Welcome to Business Edge.
Thank you, and good to see you.
So let's start a bit with background. I always like sort of developing the foundation before we move forward. So this new system is expected to see an ease in commerce, remittance, and transfers in Somalia. It will also help Somalia rebuild its economy after 20 years of civil war and fighting and insurgency. But let's talk about the effects of that insurgency, particularly on Somalia's financial systems. What were the effects of this long-term fighting and terrorist war that has been happening in Somalia on the country's financial and economic systems?
So, I mean, you're completely correct. This has been going on for 2 decades. This is the insurgency, which is led by the Al-Shabaab, who have proven very intractable and very difficult to dislodge all this time. And, you know, I would be reluctant to write them off at this point as well. They are able to wage asymmetric warfare in the capital city of Mogadishu and in other parts and in the region. Here in Kenya, for example, we've had several incidents. We were just commemorating a number of years after Westgate. So there had been a very fierce adversary. It has been a very fierce insurgency, and I think it's difficult to say that Somalia is out of the woods yet. Now, in contrast, however, the Somali economy has been very interesting. There is a thriving diaspora outside the country who have been remitting funds into the country for a long, long time, and the biggest FX earner is remittances. This is the monetization of Somali talent outside the country. And actually, there's been a very sophisticated remittance network, telecom environment, notwithstanding that insurgency that I just described. So this is an important development that you're speaking about, but it comes off a platform of reasonable sophistication, actually.
It's interesting you talk about that reasonable sophistication, because it was in 2014 that Somalia first installed ATMs. So a bit, not even a bit, a lot behind a large percentage of the world and even a large part of the continent. But the progress since then, particularly with the country's wider digital economy, has really been quite astonishing. So just in the past 7 years now, the country is on the cusp of becoming the world's first fully cashless society. So what has happened in the past 7 years that is sort of taking Somalia to this point in time?
It's quite an incredible development, as you correctly note, because the economy was very much a cash-based economy, and then, as you described, you've had this surge in digitization since 2014, and I think with the advent of mobile money, that accelerated this process of digitization, and I think it gave people more certainty around their transactions, and the fact that the currency itself obviously was losing value over time and was becoming more and more difficult to carry around large chunks of cash, that this basically drove the adoption of this digital economy. It's interesting, Somalia was behind the curve and now very much feels as if it's going ahead of the curve. And it tells us that in difficult environments, such as Somalia has had with an insurgency and all that uncertainty, mobile money, digitization really work extremely well in reducing friction in those difficult economies.
Okay, so we know that the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the IMF, all of these financial institutions have been working with Somalia over the past decade to work to bring them out of some of the turmoil that's been experienced because of the insurgency. A number of key economic reforms have also happened. Can you guys take us through maybe your top 3 economic reforms that have happened in Somalia in the past decade that are also aiding the financial and economic repercussions we're seeing now?
So I would say, I come from the capital market, so the important reforms I'm seeing, besides this sort of digitization push, has been reorganizing the banking sector, bringing a more efficient regulatory environment around it. And you're now seeing a number of interesting developments. There's a Turkish bank, I believe, that's setting up shop in Mogadishu. There are other banks which are looking to come into there. So they've literally tried to reorganize their capital markets environment. I think that's a positive development. And, they've been trying for a while to get the stock market off the ground. And I think that's going to be another interesting development going forward. The Somali diaspora historically and the Somalis in country have been able to marshal cash for projects, for development. It tends to be, my word is my bond, you do a deal on your handshake. And I think in that sort of environment, then to push people into making decisions around investment is actually much easier counterintuitively than you would expect.
All right. So until September, up to September, let me say, Somalia's financial system meant that lenders, particularly the 13 lenders that are now going to be part of this settlement platform, could only interact on a very superficial level. So what was the interaction level like? And tell us, what were really the consequences of this type of superficial interaction on the financial system?
So it would mean that you would have a very fragmentary banking system. You wouldn't be able to, the banks would not be able to talk to each other to better understand the risk. You could have a customer with all those 13 banks and none of those banks knowing precisely what their exposure was. And also you've got then, a system which was not working in real time. It means it's very slow for disbursements, for cash settlement. If you're making any loans, it takes a long time for the whole process to happen. So you're going from like the medieval ages of banking and you're in the first century. And that's the point we're at here in Somalia. And that's what's exciting for people. So, fragmentary, episodic, no one talking to each other, everyone operating in their own silos, very little 360-degree awareness. And I think that, of course, would reduce liquidity in the economy, reduce lending, and meant that, really there was very little financing that was happening. If I look through the balance sheets of the banks, I mean, these were very small, and I think this will be a positive catalyst and create a positive cascade effect.
All right, Rich, I've nicknamed you Rich after your company. Ali Khan, please just hold on a bit. When we come back, I want us to get into where the American dollar comes into this conversation, because it is a system that's going to be operating on the dollar. We'll also look at the financial inclusion aspect of it. The Central Bank of Somalia governor says this is going to help with financial inclusion. And we'll look at the numbers coming out of Somalia. Somalia is a country where the majority of its population are under 30. They've been described as cutting edge and business savvy. What will this new system mean for them? You're watching Business Edge. There's more right after this break. Still with me on Business Edge is Ali Khan Sachu, and we're looking at Somalia's plans to become the world's first fully cashless society. Now, Ali Khan, there's a number of concerns with the potential of this system, and let's get into that. The EVC Plus recognizes both the Somali shilling as well as the US dollar, but seems that it will operate mainly on the dollar because the economy of Somalia is being dollarized due to the devaluation that has happened. Now, in terms of limiting the number of people who can make use of this system, what concerns do you have, or what answers do you have regarding that? And then there are still concerns that this could also lead to a further devaluation of the Somali shilling because of the dependence on the dollar for this system. What do you think about those concerns? How valid are they, and how maybe restricting or limiting to everyone in Somalia's economy and in Somalia's economy could this be?
So the first point is really, it has been very much a dollarized economy already. The volatility and the devaluation that was seen in the Somali shilling meant that most people were transacting in dollars anyway. So therefore, I don't think it is a hugely dramatic development to be saying that most of our transactions will be conducted in dollars. And essentially, in such a scenario, you're left with two choices. You either do what the Nicaraguan president has done, and you go on a giant experiment in the cryptocurrency space, which I don't think is necessarily is the wisest idea, or you do what's being done here, which is you dollarize your economy. It's not an enormous economy. Most people are trading in dollars anyway. And I think that the certainty around the value of the currency creates a stable platform for you going forward. You can look at the currency at a future date. Once you've got more stability in the Somali shilling, then maybe you start looking at it. But for now, I don't have huge concerns about what they're doing. In fact, I think they're making the smartest risk-adjusted choices, if I think about it. And therefore, I don't see or foresee enormous risks around this dollarization of their economy.
Okay. So we've heard from the central bank governor, and he says that he believes this system will enable more financial inclusion. How can the system do this? How do we expect this to be a consequence of Somalia really driving the enforcement and the intake of this particular systems and settlements payment?
So I think, the settlements payment is the wholesale banking platform, but what you're plugging into that is the whole mobile money aspect of things. And essentially, we've seen so much research around how mobile money increases inclusion, financial inclusion, and is very progressive from a gender perspective. So I think you've got to look at it as it's connecting several dots. You've got the mobile money aspect, you've got the ubiquity of the mobile phone, you've got people connecting to the banks, and you've got the banks connecting to this real-time platform. And I think that will drive the digitization of the economy and will drive financial inclusion. I'm sure of that. I think this is actually very progressive developments out of Somalia. And I think, that they're not over complicating the cake. They're keeping it relatively simple. And I'm pretty sure that what they're saying on the label will actually happen.
about that this will actually happen. So let's look at some important numbers. The majority of Somalia's population are under 30. Somalia is already a world leader in mobile money use, and that might surprise a lot of people, but around 85% of Somalis use mobile money compared to fewer than 4 in 10 in Nigeria, which is Africa's largest economy, and far more than in the UK, 25% of the population in 2020, and in the US, 29% of the population in 2021. Do you think Somalia can become the world's first fully cashless society with the plans and the actions that they have in place? What will it take? And is there a timeline that you think they can achieve this?
So the numbers you've just given us inform us that they are ahead of everybody in terms of, if you look at it on a curve. They've already got mass adoption of mobile money. They've got a very young population, and what we know is young populations always adopt much more quickly. It's the grandchild who will adopt something new and then tell his mum about it and then tell his grandmother about it. And then that's what you get in terms of adoption. So absolutely, I think, these folks, it's strange to think, because we always see news about Somalia in a different context, the fight between the president and his prime minister, issues around the insurgency. But meanwhile, under the radar, and what you're pointing out too, is you've had this enormous progression in terms of the digital economy. So absolutely, I think if any country is at the starting blocks, it's this one, which is very counterintuitive when you think about it. So yes, I think they've got all the ingredients to bake the digitization cake.
And to that note, as you said, when we think about Somalia, this is not particularly the conversations we have, being one of the world's leaders in mobile money transactions ahead of the US and the UK. Do you think there's something they're doing in this particular digitalization of the economy that other African countries can also learn from? If they're behind the curve, Nigeria, for example, is behind the Somali curve.
Absolutely. I think, by necessity, given what I described, this enormous diaspora outside the country, the need to support family members through those 20 years of civil war, a whole platform was created which was efficient, it was cheap. If you look at internet fees in Mogadishu, they're probably the cheapest in Africa. So they've brought wholesale prices, and they've created a catalyst for adoption. I think a lot of our regulators, and I would include Nigeria in that category, are overly nervous, are scared, are panic-stricken when they see these new developments. They don't embrace them. And I think what's happened, you've had a very light regulatory touch in Somalia, which has allowed all these things to gain traction, gain speed, and gain momentum without the interference of the regulator. And I think that's what's given them this great advantage. And really, if I look across the continent, if we don't enable or put the tools of digitization in the hands of our citizens, we're not going to be able to compete in the 21st century. And therefore, somewhere like Somalia is a lesson, I think, to many countries. Even South Africa has been quite slow in the digitization space. It's a lesson to our regulators. Wake up, smell the coffee, and get with the program, because the program is going to run away from you.
And I think that's a really important point. So lastly, Ali Khan, Somalia received no foreign investment for about a 20-year period up to about 2013. And I think early investors understood that looking at Somalia only as a war-torn country was a very short-sighted kind of analysis, I would say. The IMF says the economy will likely expand 2.9% this year. Beyond the new financial payment systems, what positive news are you thinking we should be expecting from Somalia in the next few months, in the next 1 year? There are obviously things happening, work being done, debts being forgiven, new programs being put in place to also digitize the economy and bring the younger population on board. What good things do you expect from Somalia in the near future?
So just to say, the most difficult thing for Somalia when it comes to FDI is the optics of the insurgency, the story, the narrative behind that, and they've got to hurdle that. But what is a very positive sign is the diaspora themselves, who understand their own country, piling in a lot of cash. If you look at the real estate market in Mogadishu, it's been booming. You'd be surprised if you look at photographs of Mogadishu today, you would not believe that there was an insurgency that had gone on for all those years. So I think if I look forward also, there are enormous natural resources. There's a problem at the moment with Kenya demarcating the boundary, but make no mistake, Somalia ranks in the top 10 of oil and gas resource countries and also in the mining space. So I think once you get a little bit of stability and you consider that the most important capital they've got is their human capital, very entrepreneurial, very smart folks, then I think there's a lot of potential. But what they've got to do is bed down that insurgency, and that will encourage, I think, a lot more investment from their own people and then FDI from across the continent first before international investors pile in. But make no mistake, you've got a lot of support from places like Qatar. Turkey has made a big play in Somalia. So there's also these Middle Eastern, Maghreb, GCC countries who I think would be the next penny to drop in terms of investment into that country.
All right, Ali Khan, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me on Business Edge, and we'll touch base again soon.
Thank you.
All right. And one thing that he said, or a very few, there's a lot of things in this conversation to take away, but the narrative about Somalia that has dominated the news has been that of a war-torn country. But as we tell you all the time on News Central, Africa is not a single country. There are different conversations happening. And with what Somalia is planning, the future truly is bright. Now, the launch of a national payment system has allowed Somalia to centralize its digital payments. The country is on the cusp of a digital revolution with opportunity ripe for picking. A burgeoning financial sector will create opportunities for Somalis at home and abroad, and for investors as well. You're watching Business Edge. Up next is NC4 to watch. And these are a few stories we're keeping our eyes on. Now, China's central bank has banned all financial transactions involving cryptocurrencies, declaring all of them, including Bitcoin, illegal. The notice bans all related financial activities, including cryptocurrencies, such as trading crypto, selling tokens, transactions involving virtual currency derivatives, and illegal fundraising. The central bank argues that in recent years, the trading and speculation of Bitcoin and other virtual currencies has become widespread, disrupting economic and financial order, giving rise to money laundering, illegal fundraising, fraud, pyramid schemes, and other illegal and criminal activities. South Africa's retail giant ShopRite has posted a $10.27 million gain from the sale of its assets in Uganda, Madagascar, and Nigeria after it classified them as underperforming, prompting its exit. During the 53-week period ending July 4, 2021, the group made a provision of $87.89 million on loss-making stores outside South Africa, with its net debt increasing by 4% to $1.77 billion. A new paper published by South African energy regulator NERSA calls for a complete overhaul of the ways Eskom's tariffs are set. It proposes a new way for the current revenue-based approach to determine electricity tariffs in South Africa to a cost-to-serve approach that might benefit large power users who have been subsidizing residential consumers for years. Stakeholders have until October 29 to submit written comments, after which NERSA will hold public hearings. The regulator hopes to finalize the new methodology by mid-November. And finally, Kenya's weekly Mombasa tea auction held on the 20th and 22nd of September had 8.1 million kilograms of tea offered for sale. The amount on offer reduced from 9.7 million kilograms for the same period last year, but slightly increased from the 8 million kilograms during the previous sale. Of all the tea offered for sale, 7 million kilograms were sold, compared to 8 million sold the previous year in the same period and 6.3 million sold during the previous sale. And that's it. That's today's show for you. Somalia on the cusp of doing great things, not just for their economy, but also providing a roadmap for the rest of the continent. Stay with us right here on News Central, where we put Africa first and we show you that we are not a single story. Business, the economy, politics, sports, entertainment, we cover it all right here. Follow us on social media and, of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel and download our mobile app. I'm Tolu Lokpe Adelaru Balogun. Have a pleasant day.